Computer. All right. Welcome to Dharma Live Online, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm back in action. I was gone. I was in California teaching a retreat, and then I was in Bozeman, Montana. If you have not been up to Bozeman, Montana, or Livingston, Montana, I highly recommend it. Beautiful country. I drove up there. My son Emmett came with me, so we had a fabulous time and just got back a couple days ago. So I want to continue this talk on right effort, which the talks I did in Bozeman were on effort. So I really feel like I'm been milking this thing, but it's a big one. And so I want to talk about two terms and really kind of want to go back a little bit and capture something that I didn't really get out of the gate, or maybe I did, but I didn't really unpack it quite a bit. And so when we look at the basic idea of the path and really the basic idea of these efforts, is we have to remember that this is an ethical game. This is about developing wholesome, skillful, constructive mind states, and also abandoning and overcoming unskillful, unwholesome mind states. That's the most basic definition we get of the path. And that's an ethical game, for lack of a better word. That's about having integrity. It's about harmlessness, actually. It's largely about harmlessness. It's not about, putting an end to craving or an end to suffering or a lot of these things, overcoming clinging and grasping. It's all of those things for sure. But mostly the reason it's about those things is because those are the forces that drive our unskillful, destructive, unwholesome behaviors. So I'm just going to kind of unpack these terms a little bit. And they're rich in the Pali. The Pali language does a good job of these. So there's kusala and akusala. The one thing about the Pali language you might have gathered or you're learning by now is that they're really into negation. So when you have like anatta, you have self, atta, self. Anatta means not self. So they like to park an A or an AN in front of a word to make the opposite. So kusala is the term for skillful. So anytime you hear the word skillful, you'll hear Dharma teachers use the word skillful quite a bit. You'll also hear the word wholesome. Those are just synonyms, basically. And also, I actually take a page from the emotional intelligence folks because I think they got it really spot on when they use this word constructive. And so these are all kusala. So we want to develop and we want to maintain these kinds of mind states. Because, and so if we look at the definition, what is the definition? Well, wholesome mind states, skillful mind states are compatible with my happiness, my contentment, and my sense of ease, and also that of others. So also that of others, we have to remember, is a big part of the practice. Now, in our kind of, let's be honest, individualistic, striving American culture, where everybody's fucking in it to win it for themselves, of course, none of you find people, but folks out there, is that the meditation Dharma practice is not a game for you to just. It's not about you developing this private internal experience of mind where you don't suffer anymore. It's largely about other people. And even many, I don't know where this is in the canon, but many Buddhist teachers like to say that the Buddha talks about other people being such a huge part of the path. And so that we have friends, we have family members, we have friends we meditate with, those of us in recovery. We have people in our lives that are important to us, right? And also we have to be included in that equation. But so these skillful minds, is that it's compatible and conducive to my happiness, my contentment, and well-being. Now, the opposite is the opposite. Destructive mind states, unskillful mind states, unwholesome mind states are mind states that are incompatible or incongruent with my sense of happiness, my sense of contentment, my sense of well-being, and also that of others, right? And this is also the thing I like about this is not very hard to understand. This is like basic be a good person 101. There's nothing esoteric. There's certainly nothing even close to mystical around this. It's about developing a mind that we actually want to live in. And if we back up even a bit further to the way the early Buddhist tradition and certainly ancient India think about the world, we think about the world that which is really out there. The world is that which is really out there, the city that you live in, the state that you live in. But that's not, of course, that's there, but really they're more interested in the fact that we create the world. Actually, I'm going to take a quote. David here, who's in Denver, David Ronan, I think. David Coates. I always call him David Ronan. That's his statue name. David Coates posted this awesome quote from Gabor Mate the other day, who said this quote that was really good. Gabor Mate is a kind of addiction trauma specialist guy. Some of you are probably familiar with him. He says, we're not responsible for the minds that the world has created for us. So the mind, we're not responsible for how the world has created or conditioned our mind, but rather we are responsible for the mind that we create the world with. Right. And, you think you live in, Boston or Maine or Oklahoma, but you live in your mind. If you really think about it, and this isn't also very difficult to discern, your primary environment is your psychological, emotional, somatic. You live inside your mind body system. That is ground zero, right? I don't think that that's very hard to understand. And if that is ground zero, then probably what's in my best interest and most efficient is for me to try to improve the conditions of my own mind, right? Instead of blaming and, well, my mind is like this because of all the bad things that happen to me. My mind is like this because that all might be very well and true. But the question is, at some point, I need to start steering the ship in the other direction. And of course, many of you, if not all of you, have already been doing this anyway. This isn't like what I'm saying isn't like introducing you to ideas that you don't already know or things that you haven't already been doing. But what I'm trying to point out is that this is the most fundamental understanding of what the Buddha's getting at, right? And so I'm always a big fan of getting down to the meats and potatoes of what this guy's getting us to do. And so that puts us into mindfulness a little bit. And there's lots of debate on this, which actually I find it to be irritating, but whatever. Is that so? The question becomes, well, what about mindfulness? Is mindfulness a wholesome mind state? Is mindfulness skillful? Is mindfulness constructive? Mostly we would think, and I always thought that mindfulness was sort of an ambiguous mind state. Now, the Abhidharma does make classifications for ambiguous mind states. There are mind states that are what are called ethically neutral, right? They're not destructive or constructive in their own sense. And I always thought mindfulness would have fit in there, but it actually doesn't. Mindfulness is listed, sati, this term sati for mindfulness, is listed in the Abhidharma. Now, the Abhidharma, not everybody adheres to that. That's just my opinion. That's where I pull it from. I think the Abhidharma is a fucking hugely and tragically ignored text. And so they classify it as a beautiful, and I like this word, beautiful mind state. So, in those of you who know me, and those of you who've been in this course for a while, you know that I'm always harping on metta, kindness, friendliness, kindly, that the most early understanding of mindfulness has metta in it, and if it doesn't, it's not mindfulness. Right? Mindfulness is ethically. Mindfulness is bearing in mind. So if we think about mindfulness and kind of what is a very actionable item, mindfulness is just to bear something in mind, to just have it in the mind, to not hold it tightly as a truth, or to not be resistant or pushing it away, but to just bear these things in mind. And one of the things we want to bear in mind is metta, kindness, friendliness. Can I be friendly to my own mind? Can I be friendly to myself? Can I be friendly to others? And I would actually have to say, and I came to this from a very slow process. I mean, I wouldn't even do metta for the first 10 years anyway of my practice. I couldn't stand this practice. I thought it was contrived. I thought it was hippie shit. I thought it was like, there's no way the Buddha taught this. And also, I kind of blame Sharon Salzberg a little bit because the term that they use is loving kindness, which really, really set me up to fail. And because it's a sloppy translation, actually. Loving kindness is not really quite right. So, this kind of friendliness. So this would be the most basic preliminary kind of state of mind that we develop. That would be kusala, is mindfulness metta. It's a kind of being present with the experience that I'm in, but not reacting to any part of it and trying to befriend these kinds of experiences that we find ourselves in, right? And so that's, you know, not necessarily that easy, not necessarily that challenging. Um, and when I work with people one on one, and when I teach retreat, which I just got back doing, I really think that if you don't have a sense of metta for yourself, you should be practicing that pretty much at least half the time until you get that. Because I think developing any other techniques, whether they're mindfulness techniques or Brahma, any other kind of contemplative practices in the Buddhist tradition, are going to be very agitating and very challenging if you don't have a good sense of a foundation of having a friendly relationship to your mind. Or even I really would even go so far as to say a friendly relationship to your experience, because what you're experiencing is actually the mind. You know, of course, we can break it down into all its subcategories. Well, there's me, and then there's the world, and there's myself, and there's other people, and then there's the past, and then there's the future. There's all these subcategories, but it's all just your mind. You know, and when we think about how our minds have been conditioned, this also is not very um, complicated. And the Buddha says this time and time again. He says, whatever we pay attention to, and wherever we place the mind, uh, will become the natural inclination of the mind. Right. So if we pay attention to the future and how scared we are of it, that would create this kind of neural structure around anxiety. You know, and so a lot when we start meditating, you have to realize, people think this is true too. I think this is a big mistake. When most of us start meditating for the first time after probably 30-40 years on the planet, you know, you don't sit down to some blank slate moment. It's not like you just sit down to the body and the breath and clear your mind and you have some access to some blank slate moment. Bullshit. You sit down and it's just like an onslaught of everything that ever happened, and everything that you're worried about is just your mind on fire. Right? That's what it's like. You know what I mean? And so we see the monkey mind, the copy chitta, which I think I've said this before, but I was very happy to learn recently that this word monkey mind is on safe canonical grounds. It's actually in the pages of the Pali Canon. Copy chitta. It's a cool word, actually. Copy chitta means monkey mind, and you have one. And so, you know, make friends with your monkey mind, or it will fucking wreak havoc on you. You know, that's just the way it goes. That's the way that I've experienced it. Um, so just kind of talking about where does the, you know, I won't go to all through all four, but I'll definitely hit the first one. So then we look at these four great efforts, which I think is probably, as far as I'm concerned, the way that I see the kind of theory, Dharma theory that the Buddha lays out, this is the most important, most useful, most explanatory, applicable list of fours. This is like, okay, you know, the path is to cultivate the skillful, to abandon the unskillful. Here's how you do that. You prevent these destructive forces that are from arising in the mind by living with integrity. When you recognize that they're in the mind, you try to overcome and abandon them. Okay. You try to develop these constructive, skillful forces in the mind: mindfulness, kindness, generosity, compassion, equanimity, the whole taxonomy of these terms. And then we want to maintain those, right? Pretty clear. And then, but then it brings us into this thing where now another list of four, which definitely you know, I don't like to use this word anymore, but I will. That definitely tends to trump the four efforts, is the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths. You get any book on Buddhism, go get any beginner book on Buddhism, and you won't make it 10 pages without hearing about the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths is the promise that if you do this practice correctly, it will lead to the end of suffering, which I think is actually not accurate. I think that's Buddhism, and I love Buddhism, and I'm a friend of Buddhism, and I respect Buddhism, but that is certainly not what the Buddha was after. And so we look at this term dukkha. You've heard me speak about this probably exhaustively, and because of my commitment to early Buddhism and the work that I do, I'll probably never shut the fuck up about this. So you're just gonna have to get used to hearing it. Kind of a public service announcement, I think, is that you know, one of the things we need to have an ethical relationship to is dukkha. Because when I'm in pain, when I'm stressed out, when I'm suffering, that's when I do fucking unskillful things. You know, when I lie or cheat, or when I get caught in these snares of greed and hatred and confusion and shadiness and being vague and underhanded and cutting corners and all that stuff, which still happens to me, uh, it's usually a result of my inability to embrace the dukkha of the experience that I find myself in. I'm being confronted with a lot of stress. I'm being confronted with a lot of uncertainty. I'm being confronted with too much memory around my woundedness, um, and I'm in just kind of too much pain, and that's usually when the harmlessness, um, for me, tends to kind of the harmfulness. That's where I tend to get slippery in my behavior. That's where I tend to get slippery in my speech. That's just where I tend to get slippery, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Um, and so I think that on one level, we have to learn how to live with integrity, which is just super helpful in doing that. But then there's just this, you know, so let's just look at two words real quick. So there's Buddhism, which tells us we're going to end suffering. And then there's the kind of what we call a secular perspective, but really it's just, I think, more of the authentic and the original perspective, is that we're not trying to end it, but we're trying to embrace it. Now, ending something and embracing something are very, very, very different things, as I'm sure you know. Ending something means, to some degree, we want to get rid of it. So the idea that I'm going to end something, to me, has a lot of aversion already built into it. I'm going to end this. I'm going to get rid of this. I don't like this. I don't want this. I don't want to have this feeling. I don't want to have this emotion. I don't want to have this memory anymore. I don't want to have my past. I want a different past. I'm fucking tired of my past. Good luck getting a new past, you know? Uh, that's a lot of aversion, which the Buddha does not speak very highly of. That is not a liberative tool. That is actually to be prevented and to be abandoned, overcome. But to embrace something is a different, and even I don't even know if I like this word embrace so much, but it's the what we're stuck with, because I think it's the word that does the heavy lifting. I don't like the word accept. I think I like the word acknowledge, embrace, feel into, you know, this is what's happening right now. You know, it's that great Ajahn Sumedho. Right now, it's like this. This is what's happening right now. You know, this is what's going on in my life. You know, and I can kind of be mindful and be kind and be friendly and be able to say, okay, like I need to adapt to this situation, which is very hard to do. Or I can kind of get into this, okay, like how can I get out of this? How can I wiggle out of this? And usually when I want to try to get out of or wiggle, usually that's when I start thinking about how I can cut corners, or how I could lie. Well, if I just say this, I'll get out of this thing. Or if I just do this, I'll do that. It's really, really difficult. So I think that, you know, that changes the whole game for me, you know, trying to embrace things like loss, right? Something that people are generally not good about, you know, and loss is just impermanence. It's like that's right on the first 10 pages of any book on Buddhism. The Buddha speaks about the characteristic of impermanence, which is not a very esoteric, difficult concept to grasp, but good luck dealing with it when it actually happens. When you lose a relationship, when you lose a job, when you lose, you know, whatever it is that you lose your iPhone, that sucks. I mean, loss is just something that we don't do very well with it, actually, it turns out. Human beings don't handle loss well. I think that's pretty safe to say, right? And so that's so how I would go about ending that. I don't even know how. I don't even know what that would even look like. You know. So I think that, you know, and I'll talk more about this. I'll probably get into this at the beginning of the year, because I have this whole system I want to lay out for y'all. If you take all these list of fours, they kind of go down. If you take the list of fours and then you invert them and turn them the other way, so the first word in each list becomes a whole nother list, all the ones, all the twos, all the threes. If you invert the list, you get a whole nother system. It's actually a pretty profound system that lines up scarily. And so if you look at the first thing we're trying to do to prevent these destructive forces from arising in the mind, I always say we want to live with integrity. But how you really do that, if you embrace dukkha, is that if you embrace dukkha, you will prevent the arising from unwholesome, destructive mental forces from arising in your mind. Right? That makes pretty good sense, doesn't it? Right. And then I'll just show you where I'm going, but I won't totally go there because I'm trying to slowly let the cat out of the bag on this one. If you look at the second effort to overcome, and you look at the second truth, what are we trying to overcome? Craving and reactivity. Right? Lines up pretty good. This is cheap. I'll give you one more. What is the third effort? To develop wholesome states of mind. What is the third noble truth? Nibbana. What are we trying to develop? Nibbana. Right? And if you put all the, it's totally nuts. In fact, the talks I just uploaded for you guys, I go over a lot of this stuff in the mentoring program last year. So you guys can have a crack at that if you like. So I think that for me, maybe it's just my betrayal wound around not trusting things, which actually has worked out pretty good for me. I don't think there's much out there that's very trustworthy. That has been my experience. The world is not littered with trustworthiness, right? And so I've one of the reasons why Dharma practice and me and the Dharma have had a very dysfunctional relationship over the years is because a lot of the things that I was being told, or practices, or theories, or logic, or philosophy, it didn't make sense to me. And so when things start to not make sense to me, I start to feel like I'm being tricked, and I start to reject that. I'm like, and this would have happened to me in AA if I wasn't so fucking beat down. You know what I mean? The only reason I made it through AA and the whole God thing was because I was so beat down that I was like, I don't even care anymore. I'll pray to Santa Claus. I really don't care. I'm so convinced that I have no idea what's going on here. But you get your wits together that a lot of us, and let's be honest, this is not easy work. This is to actually take the Dharma on as a whole life path. And really try to commit to this stuff is a big undertaking and a big ask, and you damn well better believe it. Sure, the basic logic of the whole thing better make sense, or I'm not doing it. There's lots of kooky religions and spiritual bullshit out there. You know what I mean? Have at it. The world is definitely littered with that. They got all kinds of different things out there. That's why I always try to, maybe I don't say it enough here, I try to hammer home the idea of ehipassiko, of don't take my word for it. Come and see for yourself. Come have a look, young man, young lady. Come take a look at your mind and tell me if this is what you see. And if this is not what you see, you should reject it. And if this is what you see, you should use it. It's all just meant to be helpful, And so that makes me trust the whole thing a little bit more. Not a lot of people say that, And so, I don't know if Eileen talked about this, but the other word, and I'll probably speak more about this next week. There's another word baked into this whole thing, I think, that gets totally underemphasized, and that's this word that nobody seems to care about anymore called courage. There's a Pali word, virya, and virya shows up a lot. It's the third factor of awakening. It's one of the 5 spiritual faculties. It's one of the ethically neutral factors in the Abhidharma. It shows up a lot. Virya. And virya is usually translated as energy, which is a really sloppy translation. First of all, the word energy, let's be honest, doesn't even mean anything. Because I can put all kinds of energy into all kinds of fruitless shit, and I do all the time. But courage, that has a whole nother ring to it. Like, in my mind, courage and energy are not even close to being synonyms. They're not even in the same ballpark. But this word virya, courage, that actually what's being said is that to even undertake to even sit down for 20 minutes and try to breathe and try to just be with your mind takes a boatload of courage. You know, most people would run to the hills if they had to confront the reality of their mind, you know? And so that's baked into this. So there's a courage, there's an effort, there's a discipline, there's an application actually that's being offered. Here's an application. Here's how you apply your mind by applying your attention, by inclining your mind towards contentment and towards well-being and towards harmlessness, right? And I think that takes a lot of, and especially if you look at the world we live in now, it took a lot of courage 2,500 years ago, but it takes holy shit, it takes a shitload of courage nowadays to try to live in this world with some degree of skillfulness, right? You know, so I don't even, like I said, I don't even call it Dharma practice anymore. I call it Dharma work. You know, practice practice is usually practice guitar scales or practice basketball or practicing things usually is a little bit fun. You know, I wouldn't say that this is torture by any means. I certainly find it to be valuable, and I have a great deal of contentment in my mind that I'm very, very proud of and very, very grateful for. But you know, certainly no picnic.